Thanks, folks. If you're just joining us, we're just sharing name, location, agency in the chat, and we are recording. Welcome to the Washington Academy. This is our second session in the services series, second of four, and we are focusing on property management services coordination. And we want to thank our partners, the Washington Healthcare Authority, for making this series possible. And today we have with us two awesome trainers, Peter and Jasmine, and I'm going to invite them to introduce themselves.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Jasmine Lewis, she, her pronouns. I am a senior program manager for CSH's Federal Technical Assistance Team. Prior to my work with CSH, my husband and I owned supportive housing units in the Detroit, Michigan area. So I come to you with an expertise of being a previous landlord, and I also helped tenants to prior to that, help tenants to retrieve their vital documents in order to move in to the units. So I'm also coming to you as a frontline service staff provider, and I'll transfer it over to Peter.
Thank you, Jasmine. So my name is Peter. I am a senior program manager with our San Diego Orange County team. So I'm on the same coast as you all, but just further south. So prior to joining CSH, I was a supportive housing case manager for a good 10 years. And I also manage a supportive housing program in the Bay Area and San Jose. And I also work in the county in the Bay Area for a little while, administering various HUD grants. So I'm very, very happy to be here today with you all and be able to hear from, learn from you as you hear from us. Thank you. I'll turn it back to Lori.
Great. Move us along. So we encourage you to add questions in the chat, come off mute if you're feeling like it. Another way we like to engage with you is via Mentimeter, and there are a few ways to do that. You can go to menti.com and enter the numbers that are on your screen. You can click the link that is on your screen and we'll put in the chat, or you can use your phone and scan the QR code. I do want us to be mindful of getting too much into individual questions. We have a really limited time together, and so we want to hear from everyone, but keep it focused on the topic that we are talking about today. And for our agenda, we're going to do a brief recap of our last training, Supportive Housing 101. And then Jasmine and Peter will take us through role clarity, building blocks for communication and coordination, and what roles and responsibilities look like in action. And we have already started the icebreaker, which was just sharing your name, your organization, and your role within your organization. And we will do a little bit of a breakout group further on in the training. All right. So we are going to start with the Menti. And we want to get an idea of who's in the room with us. And you'll scan the QR code, or you can go to menti.com and enter the code that I'm going to put here. Add it in the chat now. And so this will be anonymous. So you can relieve that worry from yourself. I'm going to switch over to the Menti screen so you can add your role. And we have a few predetermined options just to keep it a little simple. And so as you go to menti.com or scan the QR code, your results will show up here. Oh, there we go. Starting to get some results in. All right. Fair amount of administrators, lots of case managers, a few supervisors, peer. One person is identifying a support staff, one property manager. So a range of folks. I'll give it another second for folks to join. And then once you have opened this screen, it should work for you for the rest of the mentees that come up in the presentation today. We have, oh yes, also if the mentee does not work for you, you can put it in the chat. We have another property manager and a case manager as well. Thanks, folks. A few more peers, a few more supervisors coming in. Great. And another administrator. Property manager and case manager. That's a full plate. Another administrator. Okay, great. Thank you. Oh, we still got more coming in. I'm going to give it a second here. Thank you for everyone who has submitted an answer here. And someone who does it all. Thanks, Sherry. That's great. Okay. Thanks, folks. I'm going to bring us back to the PowerPoint. And hand it off to Jasmine and Peter.
Thanks so much, Lori. I really appreciate it. So folks, you guys are the experts in the room. I always start my trainings with saying, I am here just to facilitate some words, some meanings, some things that we've learned in our practice, but feel free to chime in. We'd love to have your participation. Drop it in the chat. So don't be afraid to add your 2 cents here. We really appreciate it. The best way that we're able to learn really is from our colleagues. So this part that we're going to move into is a recap from last week, right? We understand that in this session, we'll explore more ways to create great working relationships between service staff, property manager, really to support those tenants that are in need. Understanding that supportive housing includes understanding the tenant, but it also includes understanding the staff that work with those tenants, having an understanding of each other's roles and responsibilities, and the natural tension that will arrive with 2 different lanes of work, right? We'll review effective communication, setting boundaries, creating space, all with the goal to keep the tenant housed. And so, as we recall from our last week, standards for quality supportive housing include that it is tenant-centered, it's accessible, it's coordinated, it's integrated, and it's sustainable. A lot of what we're going to talk about today is going to be around the coordination pieces of it, understanding that without the unit itself, the tenants don't have a property. Without the property itself, the tenants are unable to get into the property. And so keeping both of those lanes in mind, that where they feel like they could be different, and in most ways they are, there is quite a bit of overlap that happens in each one of the spaces for coordination. And so tenant center is making sure everybody, making sure that the aspects of housing really focus on the tenant's needs. Accessible is allowing the tenant's background not to hold them back. Coordinated means that the providers are all working with the shared goals and being able to support the tenant in an integrated fashion in the ways that we are able to keep it sustainable. So just a quick overview of what folks have learned last week. We're going to pop back over to that Menti, and I want folks to Describe what safe and supportive spaces feel and look like to you. You're also happy to drop those in the chat as well. What does safe and supportive spaces look like for you? Laura, you're able to go back to the Menti, right?
Oh yeah, just putting the information in the chat for folks.
Thank you so much. You guys can scan this code, or you're able to go to menti.com and put the code in, and then begin to write what safe and supportive looks like. Oh, we have 20 responses. Thank you, guys. Compassionate, seen and heard, not judgmental, inclusive for all, family, car, home, supervisor, quiet, safe, supportive, caring, non-judgmental, acceptable, forgiving is a very good one. Validated is an also a awesome one. Belonging, connected, case manager. Ooh, they're coming. Welcoming, collaborative, a listening ear, loving, compassionate. I love these. Thank you, folks. This is exactly what it looks like to have a safe and supportive space. You guys got it on the nail. I told you, you guys are the experts in the room. I am just here to facilitate some slides. So feel free, keep dropping them in there. We love to hear from you. We want to think about tenant informed approaches. And so what is trauma? Trauma, what does it look like? What types of trauma are there? There's those large scale events that are trauma. Then there's those interpersonal events, and there's those historical traumas, systematic traumas, racial traumas. Recognizing that we all at some place in our lives will experience trauma, and it impacts the way that we show up as the receiver or the giver of a goods and service, right? And so we want to understand that trauma looks and feels differently for the folks who have experienced it, and recognize that we won't always know what the trauma is that that person experienced. It's very safe to say that at some point in time, they've experienced some level of trauma. And so because of that, they show up to us in a different space and way. So some of the effects of trauma are hypervigilance, inability to cope with everyday stress, challenges with cognitive processing, memory, attention, regulated behavior, limited emotional regulations, limited ability to rationalize. A lot of this is understanding that trauma will affect us in different kind of ways, right? This is not an exhaustive list of how trauma shows to the outside. I want you guys to like understand that having experienced trauma has you to show up in a different way. It doesn't make you unworthy though, right? One thing about thinking in the trauma-informed space is that as the person that is holding a unit, who has the keys, who has the apartments, the one in the hierarchy position with the difference between you and a tenant, it's not about you. That tenant has experienced whatever trauma they've experienced, that coworker has experienced, that supervisor has experienced, that peer has experienced. All of the traumas that folks have endured in their lives really embody how they show up. And as a service provider in this space, as a property manager in this space, as a peer in this space where you're at a place to support those tenants, you have to recognize that they have those traumas, and it's not always about you when they have a blow up, or if they are in a screaming match, or they are not giving eye contact, or they are not willing to shake your hand, or they feel cold. All of those things are an effect of trauma, and we just plow through those. We acknowledge that the space could not feel safe for them. The space could not feel warming to them. And so as the folks that are responsible for providing a service, we find a way to make it comfortable. We find a way to make it safe. And you have to do that with asking different kind of questions in order to get to that place with your tenants. SAMHSA has 6 keys of trauma-informed approach. And so there is safety. That means you promote a safe physical environment. You develop appropriate safety protocols. How do you come in and out of units? Where do you sit? How often do you go into those units? Do you go alone? Do you go with someone else? Do you put on your calendar what tenant you're going to see and where you're going to see them at? It really is about asking the tenant also what makes them feel safe, and then really consider that racialized in intersectionality to safety, right? It really depends on who you are and what you've experienced that would dictate what safety looks like. The next one is trustworthy and transparency. So we really want to create a realistic, transparent expectation. If there is a time that you were supposed to meet the tenant at 4 and you're not going to be there until 4:45, let them know. Let them know that you need to cancel, apologize for the inconvenience. You were supposed to respond to an email in a day or two when you did not. Apologize for the inconvenience. Step back and decide how you can not do that again. Hear your tenants. Peer support is one, that's another one. Really, the parts about peer support is the clients who have lived experience are believed, validated, affirmed. Peer support programs are encouraged. They're like almost very much so necessary. They really lift up the experience of those persons with lived experience and expertise. It also allows for them to support tenants in a way that without having experienced that specific trauma, you wouldn't necessarily have the firsthand experience. And so they're there to be able to bridge that gap between being a former tenant, a current tenant, and then helping tenants who are newer in the process, right? So that they are able to understand what the expectations are, what it's like to live here, what happens next. Peer support really helps not only the agency, the property manager, the owner, but they also help those tenants in their process as well. Collaboration and mutuality is another one. There is always going to be some differences with folks in the room, right? The ones that identify with lived experience, the ones who identify as female or male, or the ones who, the clients that are not encouraged to speak up a lot. So we want to be sure that we are being collaborative and mutual as we are creating policies and procedures, as we are creating workflows, as we are creating a community for our tenants. We want to be sure that we identify their cultural identity, historical and generational traumas, and that those are also empowered, and using the empowerment of the voice and the choice, right? Giving the tenants the opportunity to decide which unit they're into, how many guests they're able to have, how many clients, develop an input and output mechanism that allows for them to give comment cards, encourage there to be community groups within, if it's a one-site building, a community group within inside of the building that they meet once a month and they talk about grievances and they create some type of feedback loop. We always want to feel that we are keeping the tenants' safety, their thoughts, their word, all of the things that they are providing as a means of what this unit looks like to be safe for them, what this community feels like, what this community is missing, what this community doesn't have, what's great about the community, right? So we can also have those comment cards, and they're not always a gripe. Sometimes they really provide an opportunity to brag about the great ways in which this community is supporting and helping them. We will now, I'll pause there for a second. I'm gonna look in the chat just to see if there's anything. Always validate their feelings. Oh, Felicia, that is a great one. Never take things personal, Seth. That's a great one. And active listening, that's an also amazing one. Thank you so much. I will say sometimes I'll admit that it is very hard not to take things personally because you think that, you know, you are doing the best that you can for this tenant, and yet they're still standing across the table screaming at you. They don't have the emotional regulations for that. The trauma that they've experienced, they're unable to differentiate when someone's helping them, when they're not. We have to think about trauma in a way that we won't understand it unless we experienced it at the same time, same place, same situation as that tenant. And the likelihood that that has ever happened is very slim. And so things that don't feel very big to you, could be grand to your tenant, and recognizing that they're at a very vulnerable place because they're in need of housing. Folks typically that are in supportive housing have not been in unit, or excuse me, have not occupied a unit of their own in quite some time. They also will come with mental health needs. They'll also possibly come with children and their needs. And so recognizing the multiple layers of that tenant will help to make sure that the relationship, you know, gels very well, where you don't feel offended, they don't feel offended, and that you guys are able to commingle. What I am not suggesting is that you are abused in a space because you're on the service provider, property manager, you're in the role that gives, right? Because as you are a human as well, you also have trauma. And so finding space within your agency, either with your manager or a coworker, or ways to decompress once you get home, find ways that you're able to also address the traumas that you bring to the table as well. Never neglect yourself in this space. We work in one of the hardest fields imaginable. And so when it comes to housing, like, everybody needs a place to stay. Like, I can't think of anything if I don't know where I am sleeping this evening. And so when we think about that and have that at the forefront of our mind, we're able to really understand the tightness of the tenants, the anxiousness of the tenant, the angriness of the tenants, right? And we just want to put ourselves in the tenant's shoes, but not at the place where you feel that, or not at the place to be abused. And so we help those ways into have role clarity, right? We have a multidisciplinary team that is able to help in those transitions with that tenant. It's an interdisciplinary team is a team from across different areas of expertise and department. So it's your landlords, it's your case managers, it's the mental health provider, it is the physical health provider. If children are involved, it's the daycare, it's the child protective services if they've had engagement with that, it's the substance abuse. It is whomever is on the team of this tenant and its family. And so the idea about this IDT team is that we work together to meet an organization's mission. We want to discuss proactively the tenant and the community issues, the delineation of the roles, who does what, where, why, the coordination of the efforts, and then address any gaps in the services, right? So maybe there's a landlord, there's a property manager, and there is a maintenance or security, right? But there's a need to have the hallway maintenance. So maybe that is someone that you add onto the team. Maybe they're not in-house. It's a side company that you guys pay to come in once a month. Regardless to whomever those agencies and those persons are, understanding that this team is here to address the needs of the tenant and make sure that the unit is able to suffice for a tenant to be inside, and that the tenant feels that, you know, there isn't anything broken. They are able to access the unit. They feel safe in the unit. They feel secure in the unit. They're paying their rent portions on time. They are making sure that all of the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. One of the roles that is important is the property manager roles. They are folks that handle the tenant selection. They are the people who help with the maintenance or setting up the maintenance. They work with the day-to-day operations of the unit. They make sure that fair housing is addressed. Physical management of the unit is addressed. The property manager, and depending on the unit, a property manager can also be an owner. We had very small units. My husband and I, they were duplexes side by side. We own about 7 doors. So we property manage that ourselves. And so I handled maintenance requests and had for the tenants to write in our portal when they needed something fixed, and we would then send that ticket over to a maintenance, blah, blah, blah. So the property manager could very well double as an owner. Then there is the maintenance responsibility. Those are the folks that respond to the work orders. They repair and maintain the property. They assist with compliance. Assisting with compliance looks like making sure that there is a railing for every 5 steps. It looks like making sure that the plugs in the bathroom are actually, I don't know what it's called. When you plug it in, if the water hits it, it pops off. Automatic shut off, that's what it's called. And so making sure that those things are also in play as tenants are in this unit. The unit has to be safe, right? And so the maintenance is a great responsibility because we want to make sure that the unit is still safe for tenants, their friends and family that come and visit. Case manager responsibilities is another role. GFI outlets. Thank you, Molly. The case manager responsibilities. So we do service planning, we're coordinating healthcare, we're help managing crisis, we're developing life skills, employment in the community, helping them find a unit possibly. Case manager can look differently depending on the type of clients that you serve, when you serve them, where you serve them, what other wraparound services that they already have. The coordination with those wraparound services is pretty key for the case manager, especially as it comes into housing, because if they are in need to satisfy another obligation with the housing, the case manager is able to make those type of connections. We talked about peers a little bit earlier, but I want to stress the vital role of peers. If you're starting from a team from the ground up, the very first person, we should be trying to hire our peers. Peers really help to embody what tenants need. They are able to support the tenant. They're able to support the unit itself. They're able to support the staff that handle that unit. They provide social and emotional support. They provide validation and understanding. There are examples to the current tenants of what it looks like to graduate, what it looks like to become a peer. They help with meeting needs. They're able to link to community resources. Their ear is usually to the ground. So they have way vast of an experience that they're able to share with folks. And so peers are one of the most vital roles. It allows for there to always constantly having someone on staff that provides a feedback loop. And we want to have peers very genuinely. We don't want to just have peers to check a box. We actually want to use their feedback, encourage their support, ask them questions, incorporate their thoughts and their thoughts and their answers to your questions, regularly involve them in policies and procedures in the way that tenants are matriculating through one unit to the next unit. Ask them about any and everything, right? There isn't a place that peers don't belong as we're thinking about policies and procedures and just going through the actual unit. Like the peers belong in the middle, the beginning, and the end. So the last person, we all know them, the tenant. The tenant is responsible for paying their rent. They're responsible for abiding by the lease, and they are responsible to communicate with the landlord. They're also responsible to be responsive to the case manager, be responsive to maintenance requests, be responsive to the peers. They can choose not to, but it is part of the responsibility of that tenant in order for those persons to effectively support them. Because we're not mind readers, we have to have active participation in the tenant in order for us to support them in a way that feels fruitful to them. We have an idea of what it looks like to support tenants because we've had a bunch of tenants that we have experience with. But again, everybody is different and everybody's trauma will show up in a different way as it relates to their housing or making this go or making that go. And so just being cognizant of that as we employ the responsibilities of the tenant for them. All right, breakout group time. So at the beginning of this session, folks were prompted to identify if they were support staff. Support staff would look like a maintenance. It would look like security, it would look like front desk staff, anyone that is in a supportive role, the administrator, any of those roles will go into room 1. Room 2 will be our case managers, folks who deal directly with the tenants in their case management. The third one will be our amazing peers, the folks that are the groundwork of everything that happens here. And so thank you so much, Shelly. Appreciate that for letting us know. If folks were unable to get into the Menti, can you please drop your role in there? I want folks to think about it. I know because we are a nonprofit and such, we hold multiple hats, but I want folks to think about what their primary role is in these spaces, and so that you can be assigned to the correct room. The third one is our peer support, and then the last one is our property managers / owners. In this space, we want folks to be able to introduce in the chat that where they're coming from. I recognize that folks are kind of spread out a little bit everywhere, so just making a notice of where you are locally, and then really being able to learn from peers in the space, learn from your colleagues, in the space. Lori, I'll transition it to you. Sounds like you came off mute. I apologize.
No. I'm just ready for to help explain. So I'm going to open up. I think I might do a 5th one for supervisors and managers. That's separate from property managers. So you will assign yourself to a room, and we're gonna leave these numbers on the screen so you understand which room to go into. And again, this is self-selection, so whatever one best fits for you. Oops. With the acknowledgement that room 5 is for supervisors, managers who don't fit into these other roles. And I'm going to create them now. And if you need help getting into a room, please let me know and we can help assign you. San Juanita, which is your role? And I can help assign you to a room. Great, I will put you in room 2. Rochelle, which room would you belong in? And I can assign you to it. And Liz, yes, I will put you.
I was able to do that,
Oh,
Lori.
yep, perfect.
Helping you out there.
Yeah. Rochelle needs to go into supervisor. Right, and so that is room 5.
We still got a few folks. Rochelle. Oh, I think you got into the room already. See it. Okay. If there are folks that are still here, it's about 9 folks that are unassigned. If you're still here and you can come off of mute, we can support you and get you into one of the rooms that is most appropriate.
All right, Jasmine, I got you. Room 2.
Hello,
Oof, room 2
Tracy.
was-
Hi, Casey. You came off.
Yeah, I clicked on a room, but I'm still here.
That's okay. Which space is best for you?
5.
5. All right. Heading over. Thank you.
Thank you.
Same with me. I need room 5, please.
Surely. Sending you over now.
dropped something in your.
All right. Other folks. We got about 6 other folks that haven't been able to join.
I'm trying to click on room 2, but it's not working.
Surely,
Elizabeth
I'll send you
Watson.
right on over. Thank you.
Oh, there you go.
Are there others that need to get into rooms that need a little bit of assistance? Lori,
Uh,
can you remind me how much time we have in the breakout rooms?
I think we're going to do about 10 minutes. Room 2 is pretty large. Room 5 is pretty large.
Okay,
Room 3 has 2 people.
okay.
I'm going to call it names really quickly. Brenda Johnson, if you need help joining a room, let me know. Jacqueline Bouton, if you need help joining a room, let me know. Laura Roberts and Magdalene Ellis, if you need help joining your room, please let me know.
All right, I'm gonna join a few of the rooms to give the instruction.
Okay.
So I think we can round robin those rooms. I'll start at the bottom and go over to 5. No peers, huh? Or property managers.
That's interesting. We did have some in the chat. And if you think that we need maybe another room to split room 2 into 2, let me know and I can see if that's possible.
Okay, I'm gonna join this one. I will return in a while.
All right. Hi, Jasmine. I just broadcast a message, so hopefully folks also have it in their rooms. You're on mute. I can't hear you if you're talking.
Yeah, I said I tried to do
Oh,
the
okay.
same thing. I wasn't sure if it actually broadcasted or not, so thank you.
I'm not sure either.
Okay, I just left from one. Looks like Peter's in 3. I can join 5.
Oh.
I just left a few of the breakout rooms and oh, you added them to the make. I'm like, oh, we got 4 people in the
No, I
the
just want them to actively participate if they're going to be in the space. So when they're ready to come back, I'll let them back in.
Perfect, thank you.
Mhm.
I did jump into a few of the groups and they were moving pretty well.
I just saw your note, and it looks like Peter hopped in 2 and 5.
Okay. I don't know which ones I jumped. I know I jumped in 1 and 3 at one point, so no worries. They seemed like they were doing just fine though, so I didn't want to impose.
Perfect.
I think we did 10 minutes, and so probably at the 53 mark.
Yeah, that sounds.
Background.
Yep.
Okie dokie. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Christy. As you are returning back to the main group, if you can put an emoji in the chat, just so we know that you're back and ready. Ah, thanks, everyone. I love the different emojis.
Welcome back, everybody. We're super excited to have you back. I was able to pop in and out of quite a few of the group spaces, and it sounded like you folks were moving along. I hope that you were able to make some type of connection in the rooms that you were in. Feel free to use your colleagues as support. There's no way better to know what it's like to be support staff other than other support staffers, or what it's like being a case manager from other case managers. And so I really hope that one, the groups allowed you to feel empowered and see that there are other hardworking walk of the mill folks in your area that are doing some of the same amazing work, and that you now have a new colleague, whether you guys are in the same agency or not, that you may be able to lean on. I hope that in your times as the weeks progress in this particular academy, that you find your tribe. You really find your tribe of folks that understand what it is that you go through, what it is that you need support around, and you really use that in a way to really build what's best for your tenants and your program. So thank you for entertaining that. Lori, I might need access to the slides again, please.
Oh, am I not sharing my screen?
You're sharing your screen, but there was a point where I was able to advance them, and now I can't. I'm not sure if that happened after.
There you go. Yep, it happened when you came back. You should have
No
slides
worries.
control.
Thank you kindly.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get into building blocks for coordination. So coordination, again, is what helps the tenant to really thrive in that unit. Everybody understands what's going on. Everybody understands the next steps. Everybody understands what supports need to happen. The ways that we do that really, the start of that really happens with client confidentiality. And so ROIs share information within the same organization, generally not required. You cannot require tenants to sign an ROI or an authorization form, and they may revoke or release the authorization form at any time. And so, excuse me, you want to make sure that anytime you are attempting to coordinate with folks that are not a part of your agency, that there is a mechanism in place for the tenant to know what you're sharing, who you're sharing with, how long you're sharing, and who you're sharing, and what facet that you're sharing it with. And just keep the client abreast to when the sharing has started, when it ends, what information you've actually received, those kind of deals. We want to ensure that confidentiality is at the key of everything that we do. We want to create written policies and procedures regarding tenant privacy and confidential are always provided to staff and tenants and are consistently reinforced. All conversations between any staff member and tenants about tenant issues, tenant challenges, tenant-to-tenant issues, tenant-to-tenant challenges are held in a private setting. They are kept confidential on a need-to-know basis. And so noise machines really aren't sufficient to ensure confidentiality. We really want to be in a physical space, separate office, closed doors, close proximity, so that the tenant can ensure that the information that they're telling you is not going to go anywhere further than where it actually needs to go. We want to give the minimum that is necessary when we're thinking about HIPAA and ensuring the privacy of those tenants on a need-to-know basis. What do you need to know in order to move to the next part of the transaction? And so training staff at orientation about confidentiality, making updates to confidentiality policies and procedures when you've learned that something else happened or some other transition has happened that is not in line with the confidentiality. Use your confidentiality policies to your advantage to be sure that the tenants know that you are in fact keeping their things safe and to yourself. The next one is general policies for the team. Clear communications to tenants. Who you work for, you will share information with, what you will not share information with. And I'll go even a step further to just tell them what information you actually received back. So you got to communicate clearly with the tenants regarding all of the details. I am the one that over communicates, even if it's not necessary for the tenant, so that they can grab on to whatever it is that I'm saying and get as much clarity as they need from the process. And so prospective tenants, you got to be informed about if they've gotten accepted into the building, the information that they provided, their screening interviews. They must be informed at their written consent will be obtained prior to sharing the information. We really just want to tell the tenant all that we can about the policies around communication and clearly communicating. We know there are ways that we're able to communicate among partners. We can do that formally where we established a meeting time on a regular basis. We have standard agendas. There could be, if this is outside of your agency, the need to have that ROI in place. You want to make sure that there is appropriate staff and equal staff at those staff meetings to be able to support. Then there are informal ways, quick phone calls, check-ins in the hallway, emails, understanding who and when to call each other. Sometimes you'll be speaking many times a day just to move into that coordination, especially as the tenant is moving into the unit. There's quite a bit of conversation that needs to happen in order to make sure that that transition is smooth. So understand that communication is vital. It is vital for coordination with your tenant. It's vital for the tenant in the coordination, and it's vital for your project to be able to matriculate in a way that feels safe, that feels warranted, that feels warm, and that the tenants are able to move forward with that. All right, folks, you guys have deserved a break. I'll transition it over to Lori so she can tell us about our break a little bit.
Sure. So we're at 12:01. We're going to come back at 12:11, and I will put that in the chat. Enjoy your break. Hello, folks. Welcome back. I know we just asked you to do this, but as you are joining us again, if you can put another emoji in the chat, just so we know that you're here and ready to go. Thanks, Ashley and Molly. Jess, oh, I like the pumpkin, very seasonal. I see a tired emoji, coffee emoji. I feel that. All right, I'm gonna pass it back over to the team again to continue the training.
Great. Thank you, Lori. So we'll move over to the next portion of our training. So just want to say thanks so much for Jasmine for laying the groundwork, right? We talked about who is on site at a supportive housing setting, as well as some of the key components of coordination, IDT team, confidentiality, communication, right? So we want to dive in a little bit more on what happens on the ground. So we want to start with this cone in the box exercise. So as you see on the screen here, there's a three-dimensional cone in a three-dimensional box. And there's two holes on this box, right? So if someone is looking through hole number one, they'll be looking down on that cone, and what they'll see is really a circle, right? But if someone is looking through hole number two, they'll be looking at the side, and what they'll see is the triangle. So we want to just share this quick example to show that two truths can actually exist at the same time. But how a person reacts to the truth, what type of action that they take, really depending on where and who is looking at this cone, right? So this can be also applied to in a housing setting, right? We know that the property manager and a case manager, they come to the same situation, come to the same tenant from different perspective. And we often hear the property manager say, case manager, they just want to help. They really don't care about rules or rents. On the flip side, we also have her case manager say, hey, property manager, they don't care about people, they just want the money. Right? Of course, this is the oversimplified and stereotypical perspective. We know that for the most part, that's not the case, right? And we want to just start out the conversation with this because we hear that so often. But at the same time, we often forget what is that overlapping piece in the middle, right? That is housing retention, keeping people housed. I think there is a shared goal that we often miss when we're just looking so granularly from this little hole that we are customarily see, So as an example, for property management, one role that they take is to receive the rent, right? For a tenant, a supportive housing tenant, to be able to pay the rent on a monthly basis, they need to be in a very good and well state, right? They need to be well to be able to make sure that they are able to pay that rent, write that check, right? On the flip side, one of the case manager's role is to make sure that the client is safe, right? And then there's nothing better than having a safe place to call home, right? That's probably one of the safest place a person can be, right? So there is an overlapping goal here, right? So this is an exact example of the corner box. They're looking at the same tenant, same situation, but they're looking at it from a different lens. So this is a way to demonstrate that they're actually case manager, property manager. They're really on the same team. Their roles are distinct, but they are complementary, right? And when it's done right, it actually does make both of their job a little easier. So with that said, we want to go to the next slide where we want to talk a little bit about tension, right? We talked about the roles that are distinct, complementary, but just because there is a difference in nature of the role, there is, just like anything in life, there is tension that's going to happen, right? But these tension, I just want to say that it's very normal. It's actually healthy to have a strong, have tension in this strong partnership. Tension is a good thing because they actually show that people are doing their job, right? They care. So I'll provide a couple instances of where tension, when people try to avoid tension and what happens, right? So for instance, I've seen a situation where the property manager were giving illegal notices to tenants, but for the sake of not creating tension, case manager kind of just let it go and just tell the tenants, hey, we need to move, right? And ultimately, this creates a situation where the tenants feel that, you know, they were being supported. They were just kind of being pushed to the side, right? On the flip side, I also see a situation where the case manager told the property manager to not give any lease violation, right? Because it will make the tenant feel bad. And for the sake of not creating tension, the property manager kind of just follow suit. And I think we can only imagine where that went, right? There's no accountability for some of the actions, while there should be accountability. So I think the key here is that it is important to not let the fear of tension disrupt the partnership. Instead, we want to make sure that there are ways that that are in place to kind of address the tension together. So the key question that we're going to ask is, how do we navigate tension? Right? I think that's a lot of time it's not a comfortable discussion, because I think for the most part people don't like tension, understandably so, right? So a few things to be able to navigate tension, navigate that conversation, is start with understanding each other's perspective, right? I think that is really the foundation. We want to make sure that we do know what each other does to a certain level, right? And be able to understand our job is hard, right? So with that, it does create this foundation for a positive working relationship. And with that, moving on to actually when tension does happen, so what do we do? One really important thing is to actually talk about the issue with facts, right? And don't let emotion get in the way. I think it is. I think our jobs for folks on the ground in the housing setting, it is so stressful. The things happening every day, right? Things we don't expect. A lot of time we plan our day, we're gonna do A, B, C. Sometimes we end up doing X, Y, and Z. And emotion happens, right? And when things doesn't go your way, sometimes we feel stressed and we start pointing fingers and we start blaming each other. We blame each other, we blame the tenant, we blame their parents, we blame everybody. And when emotion does happen, when that get into the communication is not going to flow smoothly, right? So really take a step back, look at a situation and talk about it with facts, right? And that way you can help the team be able to kind of really brainstorm together and really just be able to work together to find the best approach forward. And lastly, I think one of the most important thing is to be able to the best way to address tension is to actually address it before it happens. Because once we're in a situation where there's a lot of conflicts, it's really hard to talk about it without something in place, right? So the best way to do this is actually to talk about tension, plan ahead before tenant actually move into a project, especially say it's a new development, right? Start talking about what are some of the plans beforehand, right? And one thing to talk about is determine who can actually do something about this, right? Knowing on the ground, typically we have the property manager, we have the case manager, we have the support staff, maintenance staff, front desk, right? The people that's on the ground. And those are typically the first level of communication, right? If the communication doesn't flow through in that level, who is the next level of people that need to be talked to? Who is a regional property manager? Who is the supervisor for the who is the supervisor for the case manager, right? Having not just knowing who, but knowing their contact info, knowing their phone number, knowing their email address, it's important. And also talking through like how do we talk about this? When do we need to escalate this? So really having that plan in place will really help navigate this process. And next, having regular meetings, just planning to have meetings, because we know when tension happens, you don't want to talk to the person that you're having conflict with, right? But having pre-scheduled meeting, maybe like a monthly coordination meeting on the property on site, will be helpful, because that is a set space for the group to be able to actually have a conversation about what's happening on site. So having that space forces people to actually coordinate and talk. And next on mediation, right? Understanding that some tension just cannot be resolved because there's too much emotion involved, gotten involved, and that's okay, it happens. But knowing that who can actually come in to kind of facilitate communication is really, really important. And lastly, and I think for most of us, we don't do this enough, because once we address tension, we kind of move on to the next thing, right? But create a space for debrief. so that everybody can learn from the situation, right? Learning from what happened, right? Really think through what happened. Where are some places where we can improve? Where are some places that we missed? Or where are some places that we did well, right? Let's continue to do that. So having a space to actually talk about that is really, really important. And next up, we talked about the key to success is just having this collaboration, right? And I think that the key here is to support each other. I think although property managers, supportive services provider, typically they work for separate agencies, separate different companies. But the key is that they are a team, right? You guys are a team. How do we support each other, right? One thing is to focus on safety. A lot of time when we talk about safety, we talk about safety for our tenants, right? Making sure they're safe in their home. But a lot of time we forget our own safety for the staff that's on site. Right? Create a safety plan together, communicate with each other, right? So think about situations, say if a tenant's going through crisis, who is supposed to do what, right? When there's a fire or natural emergency on site, who is stepping in to do what? Like really having that conversation and knowing what to do. So just by virtue of having a plan can help ease, your state of mind. Like having you can feel like you have a safe place. Your place of work is safe for you. Create an environment or create and grant permission to tap out. We all know that some days we just don't have it. That's okay. We all have those days, right? So having a strong partnership means that a case manager can let a property manager know, hey, I'm gonna actually take this half day off because I'm just done for today. I can't do it anymore. So if my client come in, please just let them know that, hey, I will reach out to them first thing tomorrow morning. Just having the space for that, having each other's back, I think that's really important. Creating a space for intentional interaction, right? Jasmine talked about the importance of communication, right? And we truly believe that having a good working relationship comes from having a good relationship overall, right? When I was managing a case management team, I always tell my case managers, hey, whenever you go see your client, go say hi to the property manager, because you want the property manager to call you when things happen before they call the police, right? So there is that relationship building piece that's really, really important. So find ways to be able to create that connection, create that interaction. So one thing I can share, one example that we see here in Orange County is that there is a property here where all the on-site staff is assigned a walkie-talkie, right? So, but they intentionally place the charger for this walkie-talkie in the staff area. So what that does is that every morning when everybody comes in, they're forced to actually come gather in this space and be able to actually have a conversation, right? Conversation not about work, conversation about just being people, right? So that creates this interaction, creates this connection between people, and that's really the foundation of teamwork and foundation of this team being able to support each other. And meeting considerations is a very, very simple thing that we often forget. Allow time for hydration breaks, bio breaks, like we just did, right? Sometimes we have long meetings, and we really do need that. Just having that little consideration is helpful, right? And we all know nowadays we go from meeting to meeting to meeting, right? Zoom is great, but it just feels like time doesn't exist anymore. So allow time to check in and check out during each meeting. We sometimes, at least for me, I can say for myself, I sometimes just need that maybe 3 minutes when I join a meeting to be able to switch gear, right? And at the end of the meeting, just kind of switch a gear again so I can get ready for my next thing that I'm gonna do. So having some space for that is helpful. And lastly, encourage each other to learn from the mistakes. Like I said, like we are not perfect. Things happen. Things go down south sometimes, and that's okay. That's okay. How do we learn from it? How do we come together and learn together? That's really the key. And I think, like I said in the previous slide, we're not here to point finger. We're not here to blame each other because we are working together as a team. How do we learn together? Having a meeting, a debrief when things doesn't go our way, having a debrief session to talk through it is really, really helpful. So with that said, we just want to just reiterate once again, coordination works, right? Because like I said, property management, supportive services staff, they have different roles, but they complement each other so well. Property manager works to create a safe environment for all tenants, while the case management staff are there to ensure everybody's doing well, right? They're there to ensure the well-being of tenants, right? And together, what that really means is that they can be stably housed. So with that, I want to move over to providing, ensuring some practical strategies. Want to get a little more granular in providing some of the tools that hopefully you can take and use in your daily work. So first, we want to talk about eviction prevention. And I think this is a very important topic because we know that in the supportive housing setting, the folks that we work with are one of the most vulnerable folks in our community, right? They come from homelessness, right? We want to prevent as much as we can, prevent them from returning back to that same situation, right? And what this means is that preventing eviction we actually require some processes and policies that's already set in place. But before I even go further, I just want to point out that preventing eviction does not mean that eviction should not happen at all. That's definitely not what I'm saying here, right? We recognize there are certain situations that exiting a housing placement is necessary for the tenant, for the staff, for the safety for everybody, for whatever reason may be. We just don't want this eviction, this ideal eviction be the one and only strategy. We don't want it to be the go-to strategy, right? So to actively prevent eviction, it is really, really important to have a strategy in place, right? That will outline how this will happen before an eviction happens, during the eviction process, and after. That's really, really important. Because a lot of time we go into a housing situation, we don't talk about that because it's not a comfortable topic, right? We all know that we don't want to do this, but we all know that it happens. So how do we talk about it? The best way is to talk about it before anything happens. So start early, talk through this before a project is built, it's complete, right? This requires the property manager and the owner to actually have this strategy in place, right? Figuring out how and when the lease violation will be given to the tenant, right? The type of language that we will use, because typically we see a lot of lease violation, the language is hard to understand. And even for someone that, like myself, that work in housing for who knows how long, sometimes it really is hard to understand. What is this? What is the violation? Like what's wrong here? So having language that's understandable is helpful, and having a clear plan around supportive services engagement when the notice is given, right? So we always tell our provider partners nowadays that, and our property management partners that, lease violation is necessary, but how it's given makes a difference, right? A lot of the time when our client, when they see a posting on their door, it creates a lot of anxiety, and understandably so, right? So we always tell the property managers, we always tell the providers, hey, work together, right? Work together, you guys are a team, work together to deliver this message in a way that is supportive. And thank you, Christina. Use peers. Absolutely, peers is so important, especially in a supportive housing setting. Because for peers that's on site in a supportive housing setting, the tenant can see, hey, this person was just like me before. They can do it. I can do it, right? So having that extra support, it's always, always so helpful. And having a housing retention plan in place, and I'll be talking about that in the next slide, right? And lastly, what is the process? What is the review process for eviction to actually go through? So I want to just share a quick example of this developer that we work with in Orange County and San Diego. They have a very rigorous process, right? So this developer, just to provide a little more context, they're a large developer. They have their own supportive services team. They also have their own property management team. So everything's under one umbrella. So that does make coordination a little easier. But for them, for eviction to actually go through, their internal committee actually had to review all the details. That means the folks that's on the ground, the property manager, the supportive service provider, case manager, their supervisor, the managers, and ultimately the executive team, the CEO of the agency actually need to review the documents, make sure that the goal here is to make sure that they exhausted all the avenues for housing retention before they actually have to go through this. So it's not to say that all the properties need to adopt this process and procedure, because it does take a lot of time, coordination, and especially when you don't have everything in-house, it makes it even harder, right? But having a process, having a strategy in place is really, really important. So with that said, I want to move over to housing retention. So housing retention, I don't know, actually, maybe raise your hand or put an emoji like thumbs up. How many have heard of housing retention or use housing retention plan? Trying to actually pull up my chat here.
I don't see any hands up yet. I can say, I
Oh, I
don't
see a couple
remember.
now.
There we go.
Oh, there we go. Perfect. All right, more than a few. So thank you for sharing. So housing retention plan is a standardized process to help a tenant retain a housing in the property, right? So, and different agency does it differently. So I want to just kind of share kind of the gist of what it is, right? So typically a housing retention plan or housing retention process starts when the tenant gets a lease violation. And typically it's a repeated lease violation that it just doesn't get resolved from just one notice. Right? So typically first step, what happens is that a property manager, the case manager, and the tenant will actually get together and sit down and talk about the violation, like what happened. And this is a way for everybody to actually hear from each other and actually know what's going on and actually be on the same page. That is the key. And after this meeting, typically there's a document or paperwork or some sort that they sign off. Say, hey, we had a discussion today. We all understand what's happening. And the second step is for the case manager and the client, the tenant, to actually get together and create a plan to address this issue. So this typically dive more into the clinical side of things, right? So for instance, say if someone has hoarding tendencies, right? A lot of the time, it just doesn't. It's not just, well, let's get a mover and move everything out, right? It's a lot of exploring why this tendency, why this behavior is happening, right? It does take time. So and this typically is more of a clinical medical side of work, and that's typically not shared with the property manager. But with this whole process, there's a creation of this timeline, right? So for this situation, we want to check back in 2 weeks. And where our progress? How are we doing what we said we're going to do, right? And if that went well, let's check back in a month. And having some sort of time frame to when this will start, when this will end, is the key. So I think before I go further, I think I just want to make sure that I say this out loud. The most important thing about this process is that it gets everybody together to talk about it. A lot of time people use this as just a document, put it in file. But the key here is that this is a communication tool. Because if you just have someone fill out a piece of paper, say, oh, I understand this violation, without actually having understanding of it, it doesn't work. We've seen so many times that happens and it doesn't work. The key is communication. The key is to get everybody together to the same table and talk about this, right? And after the talking, after the communication, having a paper actually helps because it creates an actionable and very specific, concrete plan that people can carry out. So with that said, I want to just make sure this is that point driven through that this is a communication tool, right? So in Orange County and San Diego, what we do is we actually talk about this before project is complete, right? We start introducing this idea, maybe I would say about roughly a year before a building is being built. And we really work with the providers, the property manager really to incorporate this process into their policy. And we have seen some property management team was able to do it, which is great because that's what we want to see. So with that said, we want to move over to Menti again, and we would love to hear from you. What are some of the tools and the strategy that you use to prevent eviction? And Lori, if you can hop over to the Menti slide, that would be great.
Yep, just putting the address in the chat here. And let me switch over to Menti and move us on to the next one.
Great. I do see a chat. So Eric, as you said, we plan for housing stability throughout the entire process, identifying barriers to remaining housed in the past and possible technique to overcome said barrier in the future. Great. Thank you so much. And just like we talked about today, right? Like just having that conversation about this really hard topic at all time. That's really important. So thank you for sharing that, Erica. And planning from the beginning, great, thank you. Absolutely. Collaborative decision making, absolutely. Without everybody's buy-in, this is not going to work, right? The key is to make sure that everybody's on the same page together. That's a key. Constant contact with client, check-in, absolutely. Solid communication between tenants and landlord. Absolutely. You guys are repeating everything we said today. So thank you for making my job easier. Those are great ways to prevent eviction. Building relationship. That is, I think, if anything, that is really the key. And start early, right? Building relationship takes time. Start early to build that relationship. Adjust technique as issue, right? Definitely, because one size doesn't fit all, right? We want to make sure that whatever the issue is, there's right process, right way to deal with it, right? Renwell class. I'm not sure what that is, so.
Sure, I can jump in there.
Okay,
That
great.
is, well, I can speak for what it looks like in Portland. It is a
Okay.
15-hour tenant education class where they learn about both their rights and responsibilities as a tenant, and they can work on writing a reasonable accommodation letter, gathering references, etc. So folks come away from that with a whole portfolio that they can use for applying to housing. And at least in Oregon, it comes with access for the landlord to like a rental remediation fund in case anything were to go wrong during that tenancy.
Got it. Thank you, Lori.
Yeah, sure.
And we also see education, right? Education, continuous education, understanding each side, rapport with management, ongoing weekly case management, help with client, learn how to be housed and keep housing. Absolutely. I think the one thing that I want to also, we had one slide from our previous other training with us on the same topic was lease education. I took it out today because we just don't have enough time, but lease education is really important, right? Every lease violation is based on the lease, right? So for what is better to prevent lease violation than to understand the lease, right? Once you understand the lease, that creates some sort of baseline that creates this just understanding of what needs to be done, what cannot be done, what is the responsibility. All right, so with that said, we'll go back to the slides. Tenants' right and landlord responsibility, absolutely. That is very important. Okay, perfect, great. So we'll move over to the next slide. So we want to talk a little bit more about more strategies. So I think these are just some of the things that we see and we want to just share it. So housing retention specialist. So in Orange County and San Diego, we work with a partner agency that actually, they run a supported services team, right? And they created this position of housing retention specialist. So what this person do is actually they work across properties, and say someone has a housing retention challenge, they step in. So essentially additional help to kind of navigate the process, because a case manager has a very distinct role. Property manager has a very distinct role, right? So this housing retention specialist kind of work in between, kind of help coordinate and can really help with the navigation of this process together with the group. And we have seen success with having this person, just this extra support, come in and provide this additional support for the tenant. Okay. And start early. I think many folks talked about that in the previous slide. Start early. This is very, very important because, like I said, building relationship takes time, right? You want to start as early as possible to start that relationship building and bring everybody together so we know who we all are, right? And in Orange County and San Diego, we have this very intentional process to actually get this on the ground. So we before a housing development is complete, I would say about 6 months to a year, we actually bring everybody together. We had a property management team, supportive services team, CES, housing authorities, the county, the funders. So everybody that's involved, the developers, of course. So anybody that's involved in the project, we bring everybody together so we know who we are. That's a way to really build strong relationship, create the channel of communication. We know who to talk to and what to talk about in any given situation, right? So it's never too early. The earlier the better. That's what I always say. So get started. If there's a new project, any way to be able to get that started, we strongly encourage it. Cross training. This is a way for partners to understand what each other does, like we talked about before. One thing to navigate tension is to have understanding of each other, right? What do we do? When I was a case manager, I always get so frustrated with inspections because many times I look at my client's unit and like, oh wow, they look great, but of course they don't pass the inspection, and I'm like, why? And it's not until I actually learn what it takes, what kind of detail inspection takes, I start to appreciate what a hard job a property manager has. All right. So I think we don't expect case manager to be experts in inspection. We also don't expect property managers to be experts in dealing with mental health crisis, right? But having some level of understanding of what each other does on a day-to-day basis is really, really helpful because it goes a long way to build that understanding and really build that muscle empathy for one another, right? So cross-training can be done in very many different ways. It can be done with just the partner that's on site. In Orange County, our supportive services partners provide mental health one-on-one training to the property managers, right? And property manager on the flip side will provide kind of overview and inspection. What are some of the regulations? What are they looking for? Where are some of the gray area? Where are some of the wiggle room that we can work with? So those are things that's really, really helpful. And lastly, I want to just share really quickly a couple of the communication tools that we use. So the first one here is what we call the communication matrix. There we go. So this is a very, very generic, not generic, a very simplified overview of what can be shared, what cannot be shared between property management and supportive services staff. And this is by no means a comprehensive list, but this is really, say if something happens, the folks that we work with will pull this out and say, okay, I understand why property management cannot share this with me. I understand why the case manager cannot share this information with me, because we see that just this unclear what can be shared, what cannot be shared, this gray area, we see that being the source of a lot of tension and a lot of communication mishap that happen. So they utilize this tool to kind of just getting an understanding of what can be shared, what cannot be shared. So we don't, and like I said, right, a lot of time emotion happens, right? This is to make sure that emotion doesn't get to a situation where we get mad at each other and we cannot communicate anymore. Another tool that we use is what we call a role clarification tool. And this is a tool where you can see, this is actually the first page of like a 5-page document. And you can see here, each column represents the different roles that you see on site: resident services, property management, supportive service providers. And on the left column, it's the various situations that could happen on site, right? So for instance, resident cannot pay rent, right? In that situation, what is property management's role? What is case manager's role? And sometimes we have supported resident services for all the tenants. Like, what is their role in this situation? So this is like a 5-page document that we share with our partners. That's the way to really navigate conversation, because sometimes it is really great. Like sometimes we don't know what we should do. So with that said, we want to engage you all in a quick conversation one more time. So we want to dive into a case study. And this is a case study that that was shared with us from a provider that we work with. And I think I will welcome you to maybe either share in the chat or come on mute. Just kind of and think about your role in a property. What will be the response? What's the most effective? What's the next step, right? So I'll read it out loud. A tenant goes over to a neighbor's unit and takes the package that's been delivered by Amazon, and another neighbor notices the incident and reported to the property management staff. And when the issue was addressed with the tenant, they refused to return the package. So given your role, what is the next step that you will take? What's intervention? And what do we do? What would you do in this situation? Yeah, like I said, feel free to come on mute. Feel free to share that in the chat.
I think I would probably go ahead and I would try to work it out between the two of them first, or I could just suggest maybe getting the police involved, because that's a criminal act, right? That's above my pay grade. And I think that the police could probably handle that situation more effectively than I. And I would definitely probably suggest that maybe that other tenant that stole the package goes on like some sort of contract before eviction, because nobody wants to see that. Like people deserve a second chance, right?
Yeah.
So maybe that could happen depending on if that tenant is aggressive or what have you, right? So it really depends on the behaviors of the two tenants.
Absolutely. Thank you, Christina. I think you covered a lot, right? I think communication, right? Talking to the folks that's involved in the situation, and figure out where people are at, right? I think for the tenant that took the package, like where is it possible it was delivered to the wrong address, right? They thought that was a unit, right? It is possible. Right. So I think really being able to talk it through and find ways to mediate a situation without going down the worst possible case scenario. Right. And yeah, any other thoughts?
I would educate the client definitely on what the consequences possibly could be, and just document everything, because it could have just been, sometimes I've had instances where neighbors were lying just to get a neighbor kicked out. So
absolutely, yeah.
making sure that my client feels supported in the situation, is educated, could be a mediator between the neighbors, find out if the client did do it, why, is it just learned behavior, are they financially stressed, just different things like that.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Just really look into a little more, right? We can't just take one person's word for it, because who knows what's happened. And we hear this situation all the time where there's conflict between neighbors, and they would get in trouble, right? We hear that a lot. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think from the property management perspective, like what is the property manager's role here? Say we just want to maybe say that the tenant did take that package, and what is the property manager's role here in this situation? Any brave property management team want to come off me and share with us? I will quickly share that I brought this case study out to one of the meeting that we had in San Diego, and one of the property managers shares that if it's determined that this person did steal a package, they will need to give a lease violation, right? Because it is against the lease in this criminal activity, right? And they work closely with the service providers to encourage this tenant to give it back. And of course, if it gets to a situation where there's more conflict between the tenant, authority maybe needs to be involved, but like Lori said, really being mindful about bringing police on site, right? I think that is that's not to say that that cannot happen, but really just figuring out like what are some of the options before we go down that route. And I think I also want to add about resident services. Resident services are typically the folks that's on site in a property that provides resident services to all the residents. Say they're the ones that maybe coordinate a coffee talk in the morning, like a movie night, right? So resident services in this situation, how would they be involved, and what would their role be in that situation? Any thoughts? Anyone wanna jump in? Yeah, you guys love to hear me talk. Oh, thank you, Erica. Clarify the situation to where everybody is involved and on the same page. Absolutely, and I think resident services in this situation has a little trickier job because they work with all the residents, right? We can foresee a situation where the person whose package got stolen or got taken go to the resident service to vent about this other tenant, their neighbor, right? We can see the flip side. The person who took the package feel like they were wrongfully accused. They will come vent to the resident services. The resident services team in this situation has a very tricky job to really navigate the situation to make sure that they're not just on one side, right? Because their job is to support everybody. So I think this is all to say the important thing here is that the staff, the case manager, property management, services, resident service staff, and the on-site support team need to really be on the same page, right? They need to work together. And I think we want to wrap this up today to really drive this home, the importance of working together as a team, right? We talked about people on site, they play a different role, but a complementary role, right? And the key really is to focus on that central goal, right? Whatever it takes to keep people healthy, right? And our hope today is that as you return to your work, take some time to think about, are the roles clear among the partners in the property that you work in? How is your communication going? Is it going well, or is there room for improvement? Do you have tools in place to navigate tension that happens, right? Is there eviction prevention strategy in place? Do you have a housing retention plan that you can take up and use, right? And whatever that may be, whatever your takeaway may be sure to, when you do it together as a team. So with that said, I will pass over to Lori to wrap us up.
Sure, thanks, Peter. I want to thank both Peter and Jasmine for presenting today. And I also want to take a moment, because we do have a few minutes here, to welcome any last minute questions or comments that you might have that have come up during the training today. And I just lost my chat. Give me a second to find it again. Oh, we got a thank you. We do have a survey that it would be great if you could take a second to complete. You can scan the QR code. And I will also thank you, Peter, for putting the link to the survey there. So if you don't mind taking about 2 minutes to fill it out, there's some ranking questions and a few open-ended questions. Pause there. Do you have any questions after this training? My email is on the screen. I can also type it in the chat. And this is, as I mentioned at the beginning, the second of 4 service-focused training. Our next one is next week. I think it's on the 29th, same time. And I think we are covering fair housing. So thank you for joining us today, and I hope to see you next week.